You are now about to witness.
Hey everybody, it's me, Mark Wiggins. Welcome to Off the Bench Magazine. I'm your host tonight, and we have a great guest coming on tonight. We're going to be talking about disrupting an industry, disrupting and setting a standard for going forth in the television and sports entertainment world, which has been dominated so long by a few letters. Everybody knows what they are. I don't have to say them. You know who I'm talking about. But we're talking about dealing in this particular market and talking about giving exposure to Black colleges, athletes across the country, across the world. This gentleman here has done something that I've wondered why it hadn't been done before. I guess it wasn't time for it to happen, especially on the level that it's happening at now. But we are excited to have with us today Mr. Todd F. Brown coming to the stage. Sir, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you, Mark, for having me on the platform. I always start these conversations out with a bit of a correction. I am not in the business of giving exposure to HBCUs. I think HBCUs are overexposed. They're under-monetized. They're overexposed. They're exposed to the point where you see that brand every place, but you don't see the residual revenue generation that creates investments in these institutions where you see Black bodies being monetized across major platforms on white-owned venues, whether it's ABC, Fox, ESPN, a number of others. So I'm not in the business of providing exposure. I'm in the business of providing opportunities and partnerships with HBCUs that allow for them to monetize their experiences that take place around their culture, around activities, whether it's sports, whether it's, things that are happening on the campus, whether it's people and celebrities that are visiting the campus, whether it's engaging in some of the experiences that they create on those campuses. So I do not offer exposure at all. I think that's killing us because you cannot take exposure to the giant food store.
Well, thank you for the clarification. And it is interesting how we say give exposure because we believe that it's not receiving what it should, like you just said, about the money's monetization of our brands and whatnot. We don't see it like that. We just don't see them, or we have not been seeing them on certain channels. And where you're not providing the exposure, like you say, I do hear and appreciate what you're doing with that. One of the things I like to always ask is, I don't do bios. I don't read them on people. I read them, but I don't want to read the bio. Can you give us a little bit of background for those who don't know who you are and tell us how you got to where you are at this moment?
Yeah, it's not a lot to me. I'm just another business person looking at an opportunity in the space of developing and creating monetization opportunities on media platforms. And so my background is business and media, and my energy is toward providing a space for our people to really have equity and participate in this huge marketplace called media, where you see advertising as one of the tenets of the business model, and you see subscriptions as one of the tenets of the business model. So you hear a lot about Netflix. That's a traditional subscription model. You pay. You hear a lot about cable TV. That's a subscription model. You're paying into that cable ecosystem, and they're getting pennies or dollars depending on what channel is in your lineup. And then there's this big thing that no one knows about called advertising. I think you introduce yourself as editor-in-chief of a magazine. and the reality of print, video, digital, the ability to have advertising and outdoor venues where you see signage, to the space where all of the energy around content is put through two filters: the filter of subscription. People pay for the opportunity to see it. If it's Spotify, if it's Apple, if it's ESPN Plus, or it's a filter of you're paying with your attention. You get to go on Facebook, you get to go on TikTok. Well, what is the business model there? Your attention is being monetized through advertising. Your data is being mined and then remarketed to targeted advertising. So it's really an interesting space that we find ourselves in. And so my background comes from advertising, technology, the notion of business, and then the idea of bringing a new marketplace, to the table in a different way. And that's why we formed Urban Edge Network, to do exactly that, to really engage with the HBCUs, not from a, how you doing? I'm going to use your content to create a new service model where you have to subscribe to, but I'm going to actually use the attention that you already have in every other place and put it on platforms where you can actually participate on in a meaningful way. And so we have 26 universities where we have media rights with, and then we deliver specific content opportunities for them. We also do that around regional sports, whether it's a regional sports of an NBA team called the G League, which again doesn't get a lot of national monetization opportunities in media, or it's a emerging football league like the A7FL, where we're showing 7-on-7 across 34 teams, a sport that's been around for 10 years. Largely, if you don't go to those games, Mark, you'll never see them in any other place. And those teams are looking for ways to participate in the attention that they're getting and be able to actually create monetization opportunities around it. That's the boring part of who I am, but that's business and media.
Well, but there's a brighter side to it, and I will allow for this on my platform. You are part of the first fraternity, founded first, that type of thing. Would you like to go ahead and give a shout out to your illustrious fraternity on my channel?
Alphas don't need no help. They're out there. They're doing it. I joined the fraternity in college. It was a large college opportunity for me. The brothers continue to be impactful, whether they're in the alumni chapter, which I'm not active in, or they're going through that opportunity on the campuses. So certainly learned a lot, have a lot of great relationships in that vein. But my focus is on delivering service and value, from a universal perspective, and creating business models that invite people in. And there are a lot of fraternities on these campuses that we engage with. And I come across a lot of people across the entire panhandle. So I give a huge shout out to the experience. And it was a great opportunity at 18, 19, and I had a great experience with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to go back to something, and just to clear up my mind, when people talk about monetization and monetizing and helping, that, what does that truly mean? Are you adding them to come in to share revenue? What are they giving or allowing to happen that they're going to get money in return for this, or vice versa? I
like to make it very plain. A lot of people don't know who's the owner of the Washington Commanders?
Yeah, I forgot his name.
Dan Snyder.
Wow, so, he just sold. We're trying to forget him. He just sold, but there's he's a new owner.
You picked the name, Jerry Jones. You picked the owner of the Washington Wizards. That's a business, right? That person, and what we don't take time to understand is, where does that person get their money from? They get their money from content that they own, experiences that they deliver in the venue, and an ability to sell their media rights and or digital out-of-home rights, signage on the stadium. I think it used to be called the FedEx Stadium. Someone paid them for that. And then the attention that they deliver around all the experiences on the team. So folks don't know that comes from their relationship. Largely, I think it's $10-12 billion that the 32 teams divide in their media rights deal, which they sell those rights into the television ecosystem and now into the technology ecosystem, where Prime and Apple and others are bidding on those games. And what you don't hear, that's the subscription part of the model. What you don't hear is the advertising part of the model. the advertisers of the Fortune 1000 and beyond that actually run 30-second advertising spots is where that $10, $11 billion comes from.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to the movies and the big studios, their money comes from a subscription and or product placement. And if they're in the television ecosystem, it's the advertising around those shows. And so when you think about the business model, you're thinking specifically with the HBCUs or with the G League or with the A7 NFL football team, those people have media rights and experiences. And they're looking for a monetization partner that can be at the table where advertising is bought and sold on the exchange, and then they drive a connection with the audience that they represent. So Blacks represent 43 million Americans. They also represent $1.8 trillion worth of spending, of which north of 90 goes to non-Black people. To be frank with you, it's probably closer to 95%. Well, in that ecosystem I just described, there's $340 billion worth of advertising every year. 99% of that goes to white folks. Guess who watches the most media? Guess who engages with the most media? Guess who are the most impressionable, meaning more consideration around buying whatever's being advertised to them, happens to be Black folks. So all our money goes, all our attention goes, all our hours goes, and very few of us end up in an equity ownership position around media on platforms that we own. And almost none of us show up at the marketplace when advertising is being bought. And very few of us have a subscription vehicle where we're selling content engagement that people are willing to pay money for on a Black platform. So when you talk about the universities, what they do, they actually sell their media rights. Alabama and Maryland, I think you're in the DC area. Yes, they sell their media rights through their Big Ten conference in their relationship with ESPN. The SEC sells theirs to ESPN. They may appear on Fox. They may appear on other channels. So their media rights are sold so you can drive engagement. Right now, the NCAA basketball tournament is going on. Those people have sold their rights into Turner Broadcasting System, where you see those games every place. And they're making billions of dollars from the attention that Caitlin is driving. And that money then matriculates through those relationships back into those institutions, which is why they look the way they look versus HBCUs, who are not selling their attention at a market price, nor are they getting the receipts that go with it, which is why our infrastructure and institutions look the way they look versus when you go on a white campus, even beyond the misappropriation of funds that they didn't get, they're generating almost a negligible amount of revenue from their sports and from their media rights and from selling their content to real platforms that value them and allow them to participate in it. Does that make any sense, Mark, what I'm sharing with you?
I'm tracking on this master class on economics. Yes, I'm with you in support. And I'm glad you're doing it and saying it, because you're right. We don't think about those things. We'll just complain about something and why is it looking like that? And never ask the question, why is it looking like that? And more importantly, what can be done to change that? And it's what you're doing with your companies and your holdings. So when you do those things, so how difficult, and that's not fair, when you have the conversation to bring on a new brand and new university in under your umbrella, how hard is that conversation for them to really understand it? Are they really appreciative of the opportunity to connect and do the things you just said do when it comes to monetization?
I think it started out, frankly, where you started out. I think the conversation for us is, ooh, we're going to get exposure. We're going to get on TV. We're going to do a battle of the bands. We're going to show up and show out. We're going to do the show. And that's problematic, because when you go with the band, Florida A&M, go over and perform for the Louis Vuitton show in Paris, and you perform 2 or 3 times for $1 trillion company, and they pay for you to come over and a small amount, and you get a great experience, some small fraction of your band, and you were impactful on the show. And so I think that we've done a great job of being confused about the business of media, and we participate on such a low end of it. We spend most of our time being the show. And so if we understood that the University of Maryland understands that they're in the media business, they understand that in the Big Ten, they're selling 144 football games for $1.1 billion. I just said football. They're selling basketball for another price. And if you want to come on campus and film and produce something, you're going to have to pay another price. If you,
Right.
that's how they're having the cathedrals they're having versus what you see at Bowie State or Maryland Eastern Shore or Howard. So we have a lot of, show going on, but we don't understand that the business of education also sets the table, Mark, for the business of media. Alabama is not confused. University of Texas is not confused. Texas A&M, UCLA just joined the Big Ten. They're not confused about education,
Right.
media, monetization, and their ability to create money for content and attention, which is being converted on largely white platforms around Black bodies that generate all this energy. Does that make any sense, Mark?
You're making a whole lot of sense, good brother. I appreciate that because again, you have, and the more that you explain the impact it's having, actually just magnifies what it is you're doing and the opportunities that are presenting themselves to you and to your company and to those universities that don't have that opportunity. They're not looking at Bowie. They're not looking at Southern Mississippi Southern College or whatever. Grambling.
Think about that amazing brother, Caleb Williams from DC, who went to OU. OU is, my son went to OU. There's no confusion of what OU is. OU is in the business of sport. They also deliver an amazing educational opportunity around that business of sport. And they understand that they need the best quality content, which usually is Black DNA, to create that. USC also understood that when he went out there. Imagine if that young man had the accoutrement, the coaching, the nutrition, the support, the platform for folks to see him at one of our venues owned by us, and how much attention Dion created for Dion at Jackson State, which gave them a lot of exposure, but did not create a business model that created a lot of direct value to be monetized by the institution. Colorado has never been interested in the business of exposure. They're into the business of creating hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue for the University of Colorado and the surrounding community, leveraging Dion and what he did there. Jackson State created a lot of exposure for Jackson, Mississippi. And as a result of that, Dion made a lot of money. The institution didn't make as much. And so what we're doing in my business is creating an opportunity for that university to have a stake in revenue share that we create on my platform that delivers an opportunity to make investments like we have millions of dollars back into our institutional partners as a share of the attention that they help create. And as part of that, last thing that's important in that is that when I tell you that 99% of the media is owned by non-Black people, and they're participating in $300 billion annually of advertising by the Fortune 1000 companies. And then we, myself, Byron Allen, Roland Martin, the folks from Black Enterprise, the folks from Ebony made a statement that we demand that you start spending upwards to 13%, because we're 13% of the population, of the $1.8 trillion mark that Black people spend. And that starts to be spent on advertising on Black-owned media platforms. And I happen to own an important category called HBCUs that everybody tends to care about because those are the good Black folks. And yet when it comes to us bringing that platform to the table, we still are at 1%. Bob Johnson was at 1% when he sold BET 30 years ago. We're still at 1% today. So we're calling on that capital to be repatriated back into companies like mine and others that are saying, I want to have a community relationship with HBCUs, and I want to have a community relationship with Commerce, which are largely owned by non-Confederate states where media and marketing takes place. This is not happening in deep MAGA Trump country. This is happening in New York, Chicago, DC, Boston, Paris, London. This is happening in California. And yet when it comes to these structural racist realities, Black media dies. I used to be the editor, I used to be the group publisher of Ebony and Jet magazine. I was a president, CEO, and an equity owner of the Griot, which I sold to Byron Allen. A lot of traditional Black media companies have gone under because they haven't gotten a reasonable share of the subscription rate or the advertising. And so when we're devalued in this conversation by only being offered show and no business, then we don't have a place for Mark to be editor in chief, of a Black-owned platform that he's actually generating revenue to feed and support his family on. It needs to become hobbies and habits and a sidebar for our core business, which has to generate ways for us to feed ourselves. So we're trying to create a new space, and we're leading the civil rights movement on Black-owned media. You may listen to Roland Martin in DC and other places talking consistently about our need to participate in a fair and equitable way. You see the election where they're going to spend billions of dollars on advertising. Very little, less than 1% of that will be spent on Black-owned platforms, even though Blacks are going to be the differentiator on who wins or loses based on our ability to activate and engage and get Blacks to the polls. So, but they won't spend money on Black platforms to reach us. They'll do it on Black face platforms like iHeartRadio, which is Charlemagne and a number of other shows. They're owned by whites. Those are Blacks that work there. That money does not go back into our community. That money goes to an individual. And then again, the $1.8 trillion deficit I talk about, where all our money goes to them. This is how we shift that. We start telling stories, inviting people to the table, demanding an opportunity for participation, and creating platforms where people can engage. Does that make any sense, Mark?
You're making a whole lot of sense. Quick question. I wouldn't, as a case study, you mentioned Jack State and Deion and that whole scenario. From your perspective, and I don't know if you're involved in that, I'm going to assume that you weren't in that yourself. How would you have approached that situation to really maximize it to things we're talking about tonight? How would you, or did you?
I wasn't involved in that. I had a conversation with Deion and the folks at Jackson State when I was down there. My conversation is really about, do you understand the value of your audience with the same footprint where 70% of the Black people are in the Southeast, where HBCUs are, largely Republican-based cities and states, and the predominance of where we spend this $1.8 trillion is in that footprint. And where it's monetized at is by folk who don't invite us to the front of the table, but make us the show. And so my conversation was educating and informing the Black institutions that they have value and equity, and it needs to be taken to the table in the same way the Big Ten takes themselves to the table. And so my conversation is, if the Big Ten is worth $1.1 billion for 144 football games, and I spend $1.8 trillion and 60-70% of the people on those teams are Black, I think HBCUs deserve 13% of $1.1 trillion. Well, the negotiation is you find ourselves getting less than $1 million for the collective of all our sports. You find ourselves getting $12 million for, 2,000 of our sports, where they tend to get an order of magnitude when our same skills are applied at white institutions. The difference between the value of Howard's sports programs and the difference of UVA's sports program, the difference of Maryland's programs, the difference of, you can go to Towson and see the difference of the economics around their investment in sports. So we have to shift and understand this uncomfortable conversation that if Jackson State is in the business of surviving and putting a product out, and Maryland's in the business of monetizing hundreds of millions of dollars of content and investing some of that content back in the institution, and they're also getting a fair allocation from the state and federal government that they should be from an education perspective,
right?
And they're engaging their alumni and creating the kind of institutional fortitude where students can go there and feel safe, nourished, supported, best coaching, and able to pay the coaches a fair salary. So, but where does that money come from, Dan Snyder? Where does that money come from, Jerry Jones? That comes from a conversation about advertising and a connection with all of the stuff that we buy, Mark, which comes directly from us. and we have never created the vehicles and the containers to have an appropriate conversation. So my notion is not about Jackson State and Dion. My notion is about us as a community. If we shift the conversation to what is a media company and how do we now create content that connects with our audience, and how do we create with the advertising and subscription business in a way that we first make a demand that we be treated fairly, and then secondly, we deliver what the requirements are to participate in that ecosystem, which is advertising impressions, online video, connected TV, over the top, to be able to make it affordable and then connect with people. And the uncomfortable part of the media business, not the show. This is the easiest part. Grab a microphone, get on one of these, camera-based things, start talking. Well, that's going to exist where? On Spotify, on Apple, and all these other places. Well, guess what they're doing? They are collecting all that content and they're monetizing it because they're at the table with me, where advertising and subscriptions are being divided amongst people who said they can deliver audiences. And you get to be on the show. They get to do the business. You don't control what's advertised or what the subscription rate on the platforms you're on. I do.
Well, Mr. Brown, let me ask this question. Your message is very succinct, concise, and to the point. How is the community receiving what you're saying? Are they flipping and moving in the direction that you believe they need to go? Are there still resistance?
Well,
are we still not getting it?
No, I don't think it's a resistance. The fact is that 98.9% of the HBCUs are struggling to survive. They're trying to shut down Tennessee State right now. I don't know if you've been following the news. Howard is a large percentage of their budget comes from the federal government, the largest than anybody else. Every one of these schools are in either a modicum of being taken over by the Republicans who legislate and control it at the state level, or they're in such decay that they can't compete for the best and brightest students, not in the infrastructure, not in the salaries, not in their ability to have the accoutrement that they're supposed to have. So when I talk about revenue generation, there's nothing that shifts our people other than bringing checks. I signed up with the GCAC, which is now going to be the HBCU Athletic Conference, which represents 15 teams in the South East, as well as I think they have Central State. No, Central State just joined the conference, I believe. And their conversation is about, you showed up with a check, you bought our media rights. No one else wanted to buy our media rights, or our media rights were entangled in a deal that didn't produce any revenue for us. So if you can help us monetize any of our sports, when the last time you saw a HBCU baseball game, an HBCU softball game, an HBCU volleyball game, an HBCU bowling, every blue moon might see on a pay-per-view channel an HBCU football game. You saw a few when Dion was out there. It was on ESPN-U. A few of them they ran on the main channel. They may put the big game, to kick off the season if there's no other content available. So the idea of the reception of this conversation is, I think we as a people, we weren't sure that it was possible. We've been degraded and so servile in our participation after what you started the conversation on, after exposure. If we just get our proximity to whiteness, if we just get on there, then it doesn't work because you get on there. You might pay or not be paid to be on there. The question is, did you walk away with $1.1 billion for 144 games? Did you walk away with the media rights that the NFL walked away with? Are you creating a product that's so competitive that Caleb will consider your institution and not be diminished by his decision? Are you building strong relationships with the community to let them know how they can monetize their show and not just be not just be fodder for someone else's business model?
Yeah, that is a great position that you're talking about, because those are questions that we have. I actually have seen more cornhole tournaments on ESPN than I have black baseball.
Make it plain.
I saw cornhole, whatever else. They got darts, jars, everything.
You seen the one where they go around a circle and they throw a ball at this thing in the middle?
Yes.
They have 100 white boys running around. And by the way, it's stock full of commercials. I mean, you see every major brand, because at something called upfronts, Mark, they commit 80% of the $300 billion I talked about to the people that are at the table. And then they just now have to go out and find enough Black content for the viewers, because you ain't got nothing else to watch. You find why am I watching cornball? I watch ESPN. Well, ESPN is going to walk away with $10 billion of advertising, and they're going to get a gang of ads to run every second. They just plug them wherever they want to. Cornhole is almost free. They just stick it on there. They could stick HBCUs on there too, but they just have them on a $9.99 platform that you got to pay extra for. And you got to pray that maybe you'll see one of your games.
Yeah, this is a lot. It's a lot to that. And I know that's a major work that you're putting into. So where are you headed next? You've got a lot of ground covered. Where is your company, your vision? Where are you going to next?
Well, we see ourselves in an interesting way. We see ourselves in what I was at Comcast when we launched a bunch of regional sports networks. We want to super localize and engage with an incumbent fan base that has no other place to see themselves, and then raise them up in a way that they become a national conversation, and then drive that engagement. So if there are 26 HBCUs on my platform today, and the other ones have an opportunity to participate in monetization opportunities around available content. So if your rights are already stuck in an agreement with someone else, I'm not interested in talking to you. I'm interested in talking about rights that are available. And I'll tell you something uncomfortable, Mark. Most white people can name 3 HBCUs. Most Black people can name 5. There used to be 109. I think they're down to maybe St. Augustine just went under. It's on its way going under. There'll be 99. Morris Brown just came back up. So we are a nation of HBCUs in the southeast portion of the United States, and we're viewed as a collective. So the opportunity for HBCUs to come together and have a conversation about the cultural experience and the representation and the passion. And I always say this other thing, that when someone goes to an HBCU, the whole community goes with them. The family goes with them. They're engaged from 8 to 80. And I went to Oklahoma State. You can say anything you want to about Oklahoma State. But if you talk about Grambling to one of my siblings who went to Grambling, it's going to be a fight in about 6 minutes. and by the way, they will never discuss openly the challenges they may find at their institution. But the passion and the hope and the desire, when Grambling made it to the play-in game for the NCAA basketball tournament, the whole nation came together and it's excited that an HBCU, we in there now. We put HBCUs, Grambling, Florida A&M, Stillman down in Tuscaloosa. We put them in NASCAR, and we have a partnership with NASCAR where one of the owners is John Cohen. He actually owns a NASCAR team. He actually happened to graduate from Grambling. So those brands were put the viewership for the qualifying round for NASCAR with the Grambling car was up 15%.
Oh wow!
Black people respond. The word HBCU means us. It means the best of us. It represents the potential that we have. And yet when it comes to the lifeblood of re-engaging the community, for us fighting for our survival and then participating in new revenue opportunities, I see myself as trying to create the pathway to a place. And we know that Negroes work at white schools. Negroes work in Hollywood. Negroes work in the NFL. We are all over the news. It's us. Now, why can't we participate as an owner and do a rev share with the people that are creating the show? That part for us hasn't been contemplated in any powerful way since Bob did it. And, again, quickly sold, where now we just have the business part by them and we still doing the show. So my desire and my vision is that we get really engaged in the business of show and the business of media, and then we bring people with us and have them create, this content. I will tell you this, Mark, largely the content that you see on social media and other places are Black people, and other people are monetizing that content, that attention. We are absolutely HBCUs are all over TikTok. They're dancing their butts off on Instagram. They're all over Facebook. We're all over Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what we get for that?
Nothing.
We get to be on there. We get exposure. You said it in the beginning.
Right, exposure. Right.
I have a good friend, and she talks about exposure coins. That one will not be Ethereum. That will not be Bitcoin. That will not be converted to value unless you have a product and a business model and you're connected with it in some kind of real way.
That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. Now, how do, since you're bringing this up, and maybe people who are watching my podcast and listening in and whatnot don't know necessarily, how do we connect to get to HBCU Plus and your other properties? How do you go about doing that?
You and I talked about it before in the preamble. So the idea of Urban Edge Network is that is synonymous with Disney, and we're on 303 million devices. Everywhere you see Netflix, and you have to download Netflix, or you have to have Netflix added to your streaming platform on your TV, whether it's Fire Stick, Roku, you can do the exact same thing with my platform. So you can download HBCU Plus, which is where you can see your HBCUs, where we have media rights for sports, games, general entertainment around the HBCU experience. And you can see our NBA G League team, the Texas Legends, where we broadcast 50 of their games, their entire season. And we're going to be doing even more of that as we renegotiate longer-term contracts. On Fridays, we're going to have, we're contemplating having the G League Game of the Week. Most people don't know that ESPN started with Monday night basketball because no one wanted to show this little thing called the Big East. And all of a sudden, St. John started getting good, and Georgetown started getting good. And you find yourself on Monday nights in every bar watching this crazy thing called ESPN. We contemplate, those kind of things happening as people discover this amazing experience. So HBCU Plus, and then we have in the App Store UEN. Both of those brands can be downloaded on all streaming platforms, in Android, in iOS, on Fire Stick, on all streaming platforms where you see things like Netflix.
And right after doing my research before on this thing, I actually went and put it on my phone and on my television just for
do them both. Get UEN.
Yep.
And we have the most live HBCU sports. I think last year we did 202 HBCU sporting events. No one else comes in even close. I think, there's another product out there. I think they're doing 20, and everything on our platform is free. So we don't believe in surcharging Black people for an experience about themselves. They should engage with that experience. And we believe there's enough money in the $300 billion I talked about for us to get a share of that. Now, I must be frank with you. We've gotten very little of that. We haven't gotten 1% of the 1% of the 1%, but we've created a movement where they're responding to us and saying, you know what? There should be a Black presence in this space. There are structural discrimination happening across this platform, and we're committed. And they've made a commitment to 3, 4, 5, 8% of this money to be spent on Black-owned platforms. And we want to make sure that that's spent on Black-owned media platforms where we have broadcast back into our community. So we're responsible for telling our own story and engaging and creating our community. We don't want to get confused where all this is done in some magic technology platform that doesn't reconnect back with our community. We want it to be a platform, like you said, ABC, ESPN, UEN, HBCU Plus, those platforms breathing the life from the revenue that you pick up at the giant food store. Every brand in there advertises. So we demand that every one of those brands show up where we are. Every one of those brands you see at the mall advertises. Every car you drive advertises. Every time you get into Uber or Lyft, they advertise. Every politician advertise. Why do you think they always fundraising? To do what? Buy ads. Guess where they don't buy ads at? From Black-owned platforms. They like to be on Sinclair and Fox and NBC, most of which don't represent us well.
Do not. That's great. Well, sir, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your passion and exposing us to what is going on in our community and how we can be a part of it. Because you're right, when you say HBCU, and I went to PWI, full disclosure, in Huntsville, Alabama. A&M was across town, but the passion that people have for their Black colleges is awesome. I love it.
You don't care if somebody talk about Huntsville, University of Alabama. You ain't getting in no fight about it. Nah. You want to get in a fight? Go over to A&M or Alabama State. You're gonna get in a real fight.
I've had to fight some other fights up in Old Gym on A&M's campus, but those are other stories. But that's yes, you're 100% correct. You talking about somebody's mom and them, that you might as well roll it. Talk about HBCU, put it right up in that category.
But that should be converted. That loyalty, that engagement, that passion should be converted into a monetization opportunity, as opposed to a bar conversation with some of your fraternity brothers, right?
Exactly.
And then the institutional infrastructure would start to look different, because again, the money comes from somewhere, Mark.
Just comes somewhere. It definitely does. Now, the very last question before I go: what you have the college stuff and lifestyle on campus? Are there other under properties? Are there other types of programming that come on? Like, if I could ever get Tony Wiley to let me host his NIL show, would that be something that could be on your platform?
Well, when you see on my platform, we're everything Black. So we believe that the HBCU 8 to 80 is engagement across all of our experiences. When you go to an HBCU campus, you're going to see everything there. They have a communication department, they have a theater department, they have dancing, they have bands, they have frats, they have speaking, they have president speaks, they have podcasts, they have shows, they have coaching shows. So we have a continuum. One of the big podcasters we have on our show is a gentleman named Scott. And Scott, all he does is talk about HBCU sports, and so very successful podcast, highly engaged. He's interviewed some of the top coaches out there, including Dion, all the way to the coaches that are at Delaware State and other places. So the idea of our platform is not limited. We're capturing what we think is the sweetest part of the Black experience. That's Black uplift, aspiration, desire. And the manifestation of HBCUs is impacting every place on the globe, because those are the Blacks that tend to be in a position to achieve the highest, because they are fortified by their education, their experience, their knowledge. And again, there's 258,000 people at HBCUs. There's 1.5 million Blacks at predominantly white institutions, but they all are connected. One degree. You're 1 degree separated, maybe through your fraternity or other relationship, with Tony, who went to an HBCU. And you see that, when we come from these places, it created our parents. It was the only place we could go before. So we're not limited in any way about the Black experience, because you see the entire spectrum of the Black experience at an HBCU campus. It's the center of the community. I've never seen an HBCU in a white community.
You're right.
They're trying to take Howard, but that community up in there used to be us. And they're trying to gentrify most HBCUs right now because they want it back. They're in central locations. There ain't no spot in Tuscaloosa that hasn't been developed except Stillman's campus.
Right.
And they want it back. It buttresses the University of Alabama golf course. And then more land to be developed, Mark. You got to get a hotel in Birmingham if you go to the University of Alabama game.
You sure do. Don't even worry about it. Don't even try to get to town. Don't even worry about it.
But Stillman's on campus. It's right there. Let's put a hotel there, man.
Should do that. Well, sir, again, thank you for your time and your vision. I will be following closely with you, and my platform is open to you to discuss all of your great works at any moment in time. And
I thank you, and I thank Tony, and I ask your listeners to pay attention to this space, download the app, and let's get out of the exposure business. Let's get into the business.
Business. I love it. And thank you for the education. All right. Appreciate you
for your time and your attention.
Yes, sir. All right, folks, there you have it. That was a great discussion. A lot of stuff going on and so much more. We'll definitely have to have him back on to keep us educated and informed to what's popping. And definitely go out and support. Add the apps, both apps, to your streams on your phones, and to your televisions and everywhere else, and support this movement. And there's a lot of great things coming. I was not aware that it was that deep until I started doing the research, and now like I'm a fan. So we'll do that. So anyway, as always, if you can reach your dreams with a step ladder, then they're probably too low. I'm out.